So I was listening to this Better Discourses 3 event featuring people like Jack Prosopic, James Lindsay, and Destiny of all people. Well, during the panel with James Lindsay, there was a part of the discussion that really caught my attention due to just how insane the two people opposing James Lindsay and the other gentleman were being, as a few of their statements were just wow moments for me. You'd think I wouldn't be surprised at this point, with these statements these people make, but as I understand how crazy these people's beliefs are. But it's always just so incredible to hear them say it out loud and in such a matter-of-the-fact way, as if what they've just said is in no way controversial and no one in their right mind would push back against it. So to start, I'll let it run for a few minutes just to give a context for everything they're talking about, and then we'll go into their first insane statement. Here we go.
Do you believe that some things work and some things don't work?
Incredible analysis.
My car.
No, I mean, what's the definition of good? I don't mean to be screwy with you. I mean, what is the definition of better? Not even good, not good. What's the definition of better versus worse? It must have some goal orientation set against it. Something that achieves the goal more successfully is good. A hammer that breaks at the handle when you swing it, not even a living thing, not a very good hammer. A hammer that can drive in nails and not break, a good hammer. It behaves better. Why? Because it's better at achieving the goal. So if you do,
and wouldn't it be better if we had
the pragmatic argument means something here?
Would it be a better society if all the racial groups were equal?
They are equal.
Equal
under the
how?
law.
They are. What are you talking about?
Well, can you define what you mean by equal?
So, equity, I know that's a scary word. I know that's a really scary word. Equity is equality with an assumption. And
Equity is
and that
adjusting
assumption is-
shares so that citizens are made equal.
I'm going to
I
let
am
Jangles talk
terrifying
about
to
what
you.
he means by equality, and then I'd love to let you respond to it.
So equity is equality with an assumption. That assumption being the very Marxist idea that all men are created equal. Again, so how do you measure whether or not we have equality of opportunity? So why is equity not a measure that we could use to get there? If we had equality of opportunity, if everyone had the same shot of getting where they wanted to be, why would we see these giant disparities? Unless equity could be a measure to see whether or not we actually have equality of opportunity. I don't think you would disagree with the notion that if you are born into a single-parent household in the inner city that is surrounded by crime, surrounded with shitty schools, you're not going to have the same access to any of the things that you're going to use to live a good life. And so you're not going to have the same access as someone who was born to like two kids in a nice, safe suburb. All right, I don't think we can say that those two people have the equality of opportunity. And one way we can measure that is to see what are their outcomes.
Yeah, I don't. So first of all, equality of opportunity is kind of ridiculous. Like, unless we're kidnapping all the kids at age 3, throwing them in the same dormitory, we're not going to have equality of opportunity. It's like a nice thing people say. I'm not for equality of outcome. I'm for equality of opportunity. We should just be in favor of increasing the number of opportunity because we're a merit-based society. And one of the things that you get when you achieve is the ability to set up your next generation for success. You talked about how you don't have the same advantage being born into a single-parent household. By the way, I was born into a single-parent household, so lived experience trumps everything. That makes me right. But yeah, that's because that's a consequence of the past generation's decisions, and those like you have to accept and believe in cause and effect. Yes, every cause will eventually have an effect. So we should encourage better behavior, like having children after you're married would be a crazy radical example because that leads to greater success. And if you have a wider
that? What is your solution here? It always comes down to like just hope individuals make better choices. Are there no policies that we could look for to make sure those things are better?
Well,
Now, they just went through a lot in terms of what they're discussing. But this is the place I wanted to stop because of what the guy in gray just asked. He just asked, what is your solution to the problem of inequity between racial groups? And then he sarcastically asked, is it to hope that people just make better choices? Because that's what the other guy was just arguing for with the whole don't have children before marriage. That people should be making better choices in life. Then the guy puts forth the idea of just using policy, as in the government dictating and manipulating people's lives to achieve the goal of fixing inequity, which, as James Lindsay threw in, is adjusting shares so citizens are made equal. If this doesn't show the utter contempt the woke left has for the individual, I don't know what else will. As he's just put forward the idea that people can't be trusted to make their own decisions in life, which is why he asked, why do we see these giant disparities when talking about people having opportunities. Because those decisions create inequity, as in people having freedom to decide their own fate, for good or ill, shouldn't be allowed. That policy should be created to force people down certain paths that create the mythical equity between racial groups they're so concerned about. That is only observable on a spreadsheet, and only through the lens that any inequity is due to racism. When I was listening to this, it just blew me away that this guy so casually threw it out. What are we supposed to hope that people just make better choices? Yes, you utter cretin. That's what freedom is. People making their own choices. But let's keep going. There's so much more here that I thought was just eyebrow raising.
And if that's true, aren't you advocating for Kindy's idea that bad policies are the reason that we have these giant racial inequities?
Is a good policy not to discriminate by race?
No,
Yeah,
I would.
generally.
Because you advocated for that earlier, that we should discriminate by race when
Do you
it
think
benefits
that,
the people that you want to paternalize.
I'm curious. Do you think that passing policies that disproportionately help black people do you think that's discriminating based on race in the way that you would define it? That you're trying to
That
make
is
it seem like?
discriminating based on race, period.
So-
yes. If you are making
So even if it helps white
race-conscious
people.
decisions, you are discriminating based on race.
No, he's saying that have the effect without the intent.
That have the effect without the intent.
Like if
Yeah,
just
if we pass
coincidentally it ended
Wait,
up
are
doing
you
that.
asking that if someone discriminates on the basis of race, are they really discriminating on the basis of
or are
race?
you conflating
Is that
other
what-
variables
is that
with
what you
race
mean?
again,
No, I'm
like the
asking,
definition of critical race
discriminating
theory?
on the basis of race. In his head, he wants you to think calling someone the N-word, calling using cracker with the hard R over here. That's what discrimination he wants you to think. But helping in implementing policies that increase the access to education, the quality of education that we get in predominantly black districts. Black people live in much higher rates of concentrated poverty than do white people. And so if we pass policies that disproportionately help people who live in concentrated areas of poverty, I think that's a good thing. We're helping some of the most vulnerable people in
So
society.
who are
And
you
it
discriminating
would be
against?
Discriminating because it would disproportionately help black people. But is that not a good thing?
Nope.
Yes. And where is the vast majority of this concentrated poverty that we see black people living in? Oh, that's right. Democrat-run cities. Cities that have been Democrat-run in many cases for decades. So if you want to see your magical policies that are supposed to be implemented to fix all this, why don't you go complain to them? Oh, that's right. They don't seem to give a damn, and only say they're going to fix everything to get votes. And then never seem to fix anything. Gee, I wonder why that is. But if you were to create a policy that focused on, say, the poor, that's not discrimination based on race. That's an economic issue. And I think most people would be fine with that. But that's not what critical race theory or any woke activists advocate for. They want everything done on racial lines. I mean, for crying out loud, Joe Biden implemented a policy to help farmers that was targeted at only black farmers. That's racism, you abject retard. But let's go on.
To answer your question, by the way, the policy I would implement is stop subsidizing single motherhood. It has been a disaster. If you subsidize something, then you get more of it. Sorry, Mom.
If poor people had less money, it would be better.
Yeah, pretty much.
No. It's not about taking away money. Like that's nonsensical.
By definition,
you want to
subsidizing is taking less.
No. You're trying to remove incentives for future people's behavior. I get it.
Do you think mothers just want to have children and then they're incentivized?
Do
by the welfare
I think the state of Georgia literally bans you from receiving welfare if you have a man in the house? Because that is true.
In life to be a single mother. This is a silly straw man.
This is a silly straw man
he's
projection.
talking about policies, though. Policies that
incentive structures lead people to do things.
What he said was that the welfare state incentivizes single motherhood.
It does.
Yes.
No.
100%.
It does.
No, the welfare state is in response to single motherhood.
No.
It's not incentivized.
What? The welfare state is in response to single motherhood? Are you crazy? This is just another way of saying people shouldn't be allowed to make their own choices because they can't be trusted to make good ones. So the state has to step in and make everything better for them. As if before the welfare state there was just tons of single mothers everywhere who made bad decisions that the government just had to help. Except for all the data showing in the 1950s, there was only about 10% of black children who lived without a father in the home. Now it's around 55% today. And a lot of people point to the Great Society and the welfare state of the 1960s that started to increase it. And as someone who has a wife that taught in inner city schools for over 10 years, who has plenty of stories to tell, and plenty of them are that, yes, some of these women absolutely will have child after child in order to cash in from the government. That is called an incentive. Moving on.
First of all, then it's a terrible response because the Great Society has coincided with the greatest increase of single motherhood in American history. I mean, shit, if we sent all the men to war, which we did a couple of times, we wouldn't have that many single mothers.
Programs.
Wait, how does the welfare society?
No, you said it was a response. I didn't say it caused it. I just said it's a terrible response because it's coincided with a giant increase.
Let me ask Michael, how does the welfare society, how does it encourage or offer incentives for people to leave single motherhood?
I don't think it's designed to offer or encourage anybody incentives to do anything. It's designed to meet people's needs on the spot. Single mothers are people who don't have the financial support to take care of their child or themselves, and it's designed to meet them at that. It is only designed to stop them from falling further into a trap where their situation worsens and they can't climb out. They have to climb out.
Wait a minute now. It's a policy designed not to change things, but to meet people's needs. So you're contradicting the other guy's statement from before that your side wants policy to change things for the better because people can't be trusted to make their own decisions. These two knuckleheads are contradicting each other. One says he wants policy to change things. The other guy is saying the policy of welfare for single mothers isn't meant to change things. This is once again the contradictory nature that the woke left live in. They want policy to change things, but when that policy doesn't change things because human nature and human choice screws up their desired outcomes, they just throw up their hands and say, hey now, we're just trying to meet people's needs here. You mean you don't want to help people? Refusing to accept that the policies they want don't actually help people, but perpetuate the inequality they so desperately say they want to fix. Again, just look at what's been happening for decades in Democrat-run cities. Something the left all ignore. Let's continue.
I'm Puerto Rican, and my Puerto Rican side is straight from the hood. Let me tell you. They got men in the homes. They have the men unmarried for a reason to maximize benefits. If you don't believe people who are receiving benefits from the government do things specifically to maximize those benefits, then you literally don't believe humans respond to incentives.
Nobody aspires to be on benefits.
You're talking about aspirations versus behavior. Nobody aspires to be this, but it's what do they do?
And it's just not.
I think people make decisions based on their circumstances that they think rationally,
Where do
for the
these
most part,
circumstances come from?
That I think rationally benefit them the most. And if you create a society that incentivizes negative behaviors that keep you trapped in poverty,
we are not demonstrating
then
how
you're going to get these people who stay in the system.
Incentivizes negative behaviors. We are putting forward a thesis without evidence.
In the state of Georgia, it's literally illegal to receive welfare if you have a husband in the house.
Can I do the definition of equity first?
I would love for James to respond to Justin's
I actually don't even want to respond.
equity.
I just want to give a definition of equity. The definition of equity comes from H. George Frederickson, who wrote the first paper on this in 1968 toward a theory of social equity in public administration, and it was defined as such as where equality means that citizens A and B are equals, equity means, or social equity means adjusting shares so that citizens A and B are made equal. It is the redistribution. So none of this rhetoric about it's equality with an aspiration or some bullshit. No, it is adjusting shares so that citizens are made more equal on the back end based on disparate impact analyses, which may or may not account for the correct variables that led to the disparate impact, because it's use race as the central construct for understanding inequality, univariate fallacy analysis, the racism of the gaps. Every disparate impact must be understood as caused by race and racism as opposed to possible other variables. That's it.
What are those possible other variables? And
we've just discussed culture for like an hour.
Yeah, where does
that's one.
What are those variables? Well, as James just pointed out, culture is one. But one other important one is human choice. You know, the thing you don't trust people with because you laughed like an idiot and said, are we supposed to just hope people make better choices? Well, unless you want to be an authoritarian despot, which it sounds like you do, yes, hoping people make better choices is exactly the variable we should be pushing for. You can provide education and even some incentives to guide people to those better choices. But you can't just look at disparities on a spreadsheet and declare it must be racism. So here's a policy for black people on how we're going to fix that racism. Because not everyone makes the same choices in life. Not all black people are the same. It's so infuriating listening to these people just assume that some policy will fix all black people's problems because they assume all black people are the same. That they all think the same and act the same. And therefore, they will just all respond the same to our magical policy we've enacted. What is the other variable? I mean, good Lord, man. If only life was as simple as these people think it is. Let's see what the very smart people have to say next.
And again, the why tree, where does culture come from? Why
I don't know. Why do Chinese people have a different culture than Americans? Is that racial?
If only there were some sort of means of investigating where these cultures come from. Perhaps it's
that people have different backgrounds.
Perhaps
like
a lens of analysis one might call critical.
We should have kindergartners doing it? I have a question. So
no,
who gets to
no.
decide?
You're just gonna, firstly, moderator's just going to put that out there. Thanks, moderator.
Okay.
No. Nobody's advocating that you're going to teach
what you're advocating for,
Timmy that
Michael.
He needs to go and hate himself or anything like
Michael.
that.
No one is advocating for little Timmy to go hate himself. Do these people even listen to what other people who believe this nonsense are saying? Are they just in that small of a bubble? Or are they actually just lying grifters? Because they are absolutely attempting to make little Timmy hate himself. And there are plenty of examples of this.
My children are now in private school and are thriving. We had specifically moved chased out of LCPS due to the swift and uncompromising political agenda of Superintendents Williams, Ziegler, and the school board that have forced upon us. First, it was in early spring of 2020 when my 6-year-old somberly came to me and asked me if she was born evil because she was a white person.
I also think that, and there's some studies that have borne this out a little bit, that we don't actually, we have to support our classrooms and our student bodies in navigating racial tension if that starts to show up because white kids are feeling like, oh, I'm only always the bad guy. Like we have to, which is why we need those anti-racist models and to just have that conversation. But in terms of their development, this is going to sound really counterintuitive, especially if you're a parent. We actually, there's a number of studies that suggest we shouldn't be worrying too much about making white kids feel bad because they get so much false messages about their goodness that it's actually kind of critically important for them. Now, we don't want to induce shame, right? Which is why they need those models. They need to hear, say, yeah, white people can do racial justice too, right? Here's some examples. So we don't want to introduce shame, and there's a tricky line, and we don't want to cause racial tension where then they have no way to enter the diversity conversation. And so we need to talk about anti-racism with them. We need to give them those models. But we also actually need to, it's good for them to feel a bit, like white guilt is a really big problem. And my goal as a parent is to get my kids into white guilt and beyond it as young as possible. Because white adults are running around with white guilt and we're stuck. White guilt has to happen. It's a developmental need. If you believe in equity and you live in this kind of system and you're white, you're going to hit white guilt. So in my mind, I'm like, I need my 4-year-old to experience white guilt so I can support her out of it and beyond it. And I don't want her doing it when she's 20. I want her to be well past that point.
I've got plenty of other examples of these woke critical race theory activists, a lot of them teachers, saying very similar things. That children need to be taught these concepts, essentially so they don't become another racist in a racist system that gives them privilege, but rather to grow up and become an ally for the cause. Basically, they want to turn them into activists, and they want to do it as soon as they can. And to do that, they need to be made to feel white guilt, which is what makes little Timmy hate himself. I mean, for goodness sakes, just go look at that Libs of TikTok Twitter account, and it's wall-to-wall woke teachers just spilling the beans all over TikTok. They're not shy about it. They're straight up telling people what they want to do, and they're proud of it. So screw this guy and his gaslighting. Moving on.
But there is a conception of race that children do have, and it's worth exploring.
Mike,
let me finish.
Not Bailey.
Lindsay, you have spoken for like half this. Let me finish.
I literally have not.
You literally
I've interrupted
have. You have
everything.
literally been reading books on stage. Let me finish.
I read 2 paragraphs.
These problems do not arise out of a lack of, these problems do not arise because the left are too conscientious about the issue of race, and they're trying to teach children to be more conscientious about
False.
race. It arises because people like James Lindsay and the right are not conscientious enough about the issues of race. There are disparities that exist based on race due to past history of legacy
People
of
like
racism that have not been solved.
We're gonna go to Q&A, but I have one final question because this is how this conversation always ends up. I feel like we get to this fruitless place where we can't even agree on basic definitions.
That's
anymore
because
of
we
what
have
equality
to
means.
argue about whether
Yeah.
we accept structural determinism or not.
Right.
That's it. That is the separation here. Critical race theory is based on the idea that race is structurally determinant. Liberalism is based on the idea that every individual is an individual, therefore your identity is not structurally determinant. And until you resolve that gap, which is unbridgeable, there is no conversation to be had because you're literally talking about the world seen through 2 different lenses.
How can we have a social construction of race, but not be structurally determined by your race?
Because the
agree that, like-
construction doesn't have to be determinant. It doesn't have to be that the construction itself creates conditions so that it controls how your mind works. As I just mentioned, the other night I met a nice black man that came to one of my talks. We spoke for a little while. He's literally wearing like anime t-shirt and like a kimono over it, and he's talking to me about every anime ever and bowing to me as he talks because he's adapted a bunch of things from Japanese culture. So his culture, what is he? What's his culture? Right? He's a weeb. Is he structurally determined to have become a weeb?
Hey,
Of course
can we
not.
all at least, can this be the unifying thing on the panel?
He's an individual
Weebs don't
who
deserve
likes-
rights.
All right, let the questioners ask their
Okay.
questions.
Actually, we're gonna go to questions, but just quickly, I would love for you, each person, just to say something. Do you think there's anything that you share in common with the people who so passionately disagree with you about critical
Yes.
race theory? About underlying, if you tear everything down to your foundational beliefs, do you at least have a shared why, if not a shared how?
If I had to build a vision for the future, I actually agree with Lindsay. I actually agree, because I'm fundamentally liberal. I like the idea of moving beyond these social categories, but there has to be a time and a context for that where we first resolved for all the disparities the creation of these categories has created. We have not yet done that. We have not yet achieved equality of opportunity. A poor black person does not have the same opportunities in life as a rich white person.
But
When
you
we
wanna
move
get
past-
to a place-
But I want to get to a place where it stops mattering, where we've solved for these inequalities, and it stops mattering because there's no sense in keeping them around, the categories around.
There has to be a time and place where we solve all these disparities. Well, you're never going to do that if you just group people by race and look at each group to decide if they're equal or not. Human choice, human freedom will never create that type of equity you're looking for. The type that you can just measure out on your spreadsheet and have it show equal outcomes. So the only way to get that is to force it on people. And just like James said, that's the definition of equity, to redistribute power, privilege, and resources to make people equal. And by equal, again, it means equal on that spreadsheet. And guess what? People are not going to go along with that. People are going to say hell no to that. And when that starts happening is when bad things start happening. Yet these morons think if they just create a policy to fix everything, it'll just happen because, as James also pointed out, these people believe race is structurally determinate, and thus everyone is the same. When all evidence points quite obviously, and in a lot of ways hilariously, in the other direction. Well, that's pretty much what I wanted to go through. I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff discussed in this stream, but thought this exchange stood out the most to me on just how insane the 2 woke leftists were being, and just wanted to give my 2 cents on it. So, thanks for watching, and God bless.